Now, let's talk about tragedy and comedy. Tragedy is all about that sublime vibe. If a story doesn't give us those deep, intense feelings, it can't really be a tragedy unless it's faking it. The sublime is all about showing the strength and dignity of human nature in the face of some seriously scary stuff. That's why Schiller was so on the money. He said that the greatest joy always comes with a bit of pain, but when you're dealing with the sublime, your spirit can still handle the tough stuff and come out even stronger. But what happens when freedom gets blocked and takes a serious blow? That's when we're in the tragic zone. So, what's the deal with tragic beauty? Well, it's all about that sublime feeling. Tragedy has to have those sublime elements, and the sublime comes from finding some kind of pleasure in the middle of all the suffering. That's why the basic idea of tragedy is to create the sublime through suffering. In the end, the success or failure of a tragedy depends on its ability to turn suffering into something truly sublime. However, tragedy isn't automatically sublime. In tragedy, human nature's value isn't fulfilled, but totally cut off from the real world. So, what's tragedy? It's about affirming human worth in complete loneliness. When justice gets wrecked, fate turns cruel, and heroes make sacrifices, it all shows how far apart the real world and human value are. From this angle, tragedy is on a whole other level than the sublime. It uses the deepest pain to show the epic struggle for human freedom. Hey, have you heard of Chernyshevsky? This Russian philosopher, also an art critic and aesthetician, once said, "Tragedy records the greatness of human suffering." Lu Xun, died 1936, has some really interesting stuff to say. You know, he wrote an essay called On the Collapsing of the Leifong Pagoda, right? In that piece, he talks about tragedy and comedy, and it's a real classic, even though it's short. Lu Xun said that tragedy shows how valuable things in life get destroyed. In the real world, the value of human nature is destroyed, which is the deepest pain, but somehow it becomes something to be appreciated. How does that even work? Maybe we still need Kant's principles to explain it. The heart of tragic beauty is all about knowing yourself. And you know what? We often figure that out through tough times. It's when we're battling against the world's letdowns that we really show our dignity. We find our worth in being totally alone. While we can't fully be alone in the real world, in tragedy we stand tall in that solitude. That's what tragic beauty is all about, understanding and respecting the pain we go through, but truly embracing our freedom. This is all realized in the beauty of tragedy. When we look at art in real life, we might feel different things like beauty, the sublime, tragedy, and comedy. But I think it's safe to say that tragic beauty is the most powerful and is found in most great works. It's in tragedy that Kant's idea of the end of all things really comes through. Tragic beauty wakes up our deepest feelings and is something we all carry inside us. You can see it all around in everyday life, even in small things. For example, the spooky stories in Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio, 18th century CE, show this well. So, let's talk about a problem. What problem? The kind of fake tragedy that we often come across in art. What's a big sign that a tragic work is hitting the mark? Tears. If a piece doesn't make us cry, it's definitely not packing the punch of a real tragedy. Just like with comedy, what's the big giveaway? Laughter. If something doesn't make you laugh, can it still be called a comedy? Nope, it's missing the mark. Tragedy is supposed to make us cry, and that's a big sign. But sometimes, with these fake tragic works, we still end up shedding tears. There are a lot of these fake tragedies around these days. They cook up some kind of random misfortune to take a swipe at goodness. Have you seen these kinds of works? There are quite a few in TV dramas now, some of which seem to be tragic. But I can tell it's all fake. A good person, a really kind and upright main character, suddenly gets a terminal illness. So, as viewers, we also root for this character in the TV drama, right? Such a good person, even better than most of us, so kind, and then out of the blue, they get cancer. What do? Then a lot of suffering follows, and we get sucked in, right? We get sucked in and we start crying, but after watching the TV drama, we think, why did we shed tears? It didn't make us feel noble. It doesn't affirm the freedom of our soul or human dignity. This kind of tragedy makes our tears flow, but it fails to express any noble suffering. These kinds of works are actually fake tragedies. There is no magic. The skill of an author lies in creating accidental misfortune. Of course, the story might seem possible in reality, but it's a possibility that is not credible. So, what Aristotle was saying is that there are two types of storytelling. One type is where the plot could happen in real life, but it doesn't feel real. Why not? Because it doesn't have that sense of inevitability. But then there are stories where the plot feels real, but it's not really possible. So, what should we aim for? We should aim for stories that feel real but might not actually be possible. We want to create the sense of possibility that doesn't quite feel real, but that what feels real is actually inevitable. In a tragedy, the fate of the characters should feel inevitable rather than just be subject to random chance. This is a really important point. In The Dream of the Red Chamber, Lu Xun really nailed it as a tragic work. He poured his heart out, and you can feel it in every line. It's a real tearjerker. But what's cool is that Lu Xun didn't just throw in a bunch of random sad stuff for shock value. The destinies of the key characters, the 12 ladies of Jinling, those 12 beauties, face totally inevitable destinies. None of that random bad luck nonsense. That's a big deal. Lu Xun didn't just have Baoyu and Dayu fall head over heels in love and then suddenly one of them kicks the bucket from some illness. Nah, it's not like that. Dayu pays back Baoyu with a lifetime of tears, you feel me? It really brings out the tragic side of love. You know, in real life, love doesn't just hang out on its own, it's gotta turn into marriage, right? And if you want to take a fling and turn it into a lifelong thing, it's gotta be a perfect match. But what does a perfect match really mean? It's all about having some dough and living the good life. It's like saying, in real-life marriage, you gotta have some cash to back it up. Let's forget about all the sad stuff in The Dream of the Red Chamber for a sec. There's all kinds of heartbreak and tragedy in that book. One of the big themes is the tragedy of love, you feel me? The love story between Baoyu and Dayu is the main deal. As a love tragedy, the novel really hits you in the feels. Now, when we talk about this, it might seem like a downer for all the young romantics out there. But the truth is, love itself is a real tearjerker. It's a tough kind of pain that makes us grow. It's good for a guy to go through a heartbreak at least once. It toughens him up. Love is like a hardcore school, and we all gotta go through it and graduate. So, if you read the novel with a focus on the love tragedy, you'll learn a lot. I remember this one time, a college kid told me during a break, "Hey, Mr. Wang, I've been feeling super lonely lately." I asked him, "You got a special someone?" He said, "Nah. How can someone who's never been in love understand what it's like to feel lonely?" I told him, "Go read The Dream of the Red Chamber. Love is basically a lonely thing, that's for sure. And it's also a real tearjerker. If you've never shed a tear over love, is it even real love? But hey, don't take my word as gospel. Love is also about that feeling of déjà vu, that's for real too. When Baoyu and Dayu first met, it was when Dayu rolled up to the Ronghua Palace, right? They hadn't met before, but they were feeling the same vibes. Baoyu straight up said, "I've seen this girl before." Dayu was thinking the same thing but didn't say it out loud. Then, Granny Jia, who was nearby, was like, "Baoyu's talking nonsense again. How could he have seen her before?" But what Baoyu said was the real deal. It was like déjà vu. It's another way of showing the truth about love. The dream of the red chamber is something else, man. There's this saying, there's no reunion without a past grudge, and tears are shed by those who have a sense of déjà vu. It's all about love. It's not some deep philosophy, it's literature. Literature uses stories and images to speak, but it also shows a deep understanding of love. It's like a whole way of thinking. You can find it in The Dream of the Red Chamber. So, when we look at a lot of so-called tragic works these days, they're often just faking it. If we're saying that when something's beautiful, the contrast is the sublime, and when something's the contrast of the sublime, it's beautiful, then what's the opposite of tragedy? It's comedy. Tragedy and comedy are like two sides of a coin. If tragedy is all about the deep, heavy stuff, then comedy is like the lighter, fun side. Comedy is all about taking the not-so-pretty stuff and making it look good. It's like turning the ugly into something beautiful. And when tragedy makes you cry, comedy's there to make you laugh. So, why do we laugh? Well, if something can't make you laugh, then it can't be called comedy. But what's the deal with laughter? What's behind it all? When the real ugly is dressed up as beauty, Tchaikovsky had a great line about it. What did he say? He said, "When the ugly tries to pass itself off as beauty, it turns into a joke. When the ugly struts around like it's beautiful, that's when the comedy kicks in." And you know, comedy comes in different flavors. The first type is called farce. It's all about the stuff that's ugly and absurd. You take that ugliness and absurdity and package it up as something beautiful, the ugly and the absurd. But there's a catch, just like how the sublime presents the feeling of awe, but what's the catch? We're not directly threatened, we're safe. Similarly, when the ugly is made to look like beauty, it shouldn't make us feel pain or hurt. If ugliness or absurdity does make us feel pain or hurt, then it becomes a tragedy. Ugliness without pain, absurdity without danger, that's the deal. That's the basic thing about what's being presented in comedy: ugliness without pain, absurdity without danger.